I realized that I owe Eloise Bridgerton an apology. You see, I haven't hidden it on my channel that I personally found Eloise to be one of the most selfish characters on the show. And the most recent season that we got didn't make things any better for her in my book. However, having had time to do rewatches of select episodes of the previous seasons, I have since come to the realization that Eloise Bridgerton isn't selfish. At least not to her. And that's very important to note because when we consider what she has to work with and the space and parameters within which this is occurring, then it is less Eloise is selfish and more Eloise is a reflection of those around her. After all, can we really consider her selfish when no one else around her is really selfless? In a paper titled Family Relationships and Well-Being by Patricia A. Thomas, Hugh Liu, and Deborah Umberson, they postulate that interpersonal interactions between family members have lasting impact and can influence the development and well-being of an individual via psychosocial, behavioral, and physiological pathways. Therefore, we can assume that family dynamics play a very important role in shaping our behaviors. And the reason why I bring this up is because we can legit see this in the case of Eloise Bridgerton. Like I said, I've been doing a rewatch of the show from season 1 as I count down to the time for season 4 dropping next year. And one thing that's become clear with rewatches for me is that the entire Bridgerton brood are all unapologetically selfish in their actions and how they choose to pursue it. At least the ones whose story we've gotten and had the chance to focus on so far. Daphne, yes, was hurt and felt like her husband had deceived her by selectively choosing to keep her in the dark on certain matters, and she responded in a way that prioritized what she wanted, committing an act that I personally find very egregious, as I know a lot of us who watched the scene felt as well. But Daphne in that scene wasn't thinking about the morality of it. She was instead thinking of herself, prioritizing her rage, her betrayal, her humiliation, and why she made the decision she did. Some might disagree with me, but I think a lot of us can agree that that act was in itself a selfish one. Now, was Simon also selfish in that regards with how he chose to keep his naive to the world bride ignorant of how babies are made and the technicalities with which he was getting away with maintaining his vows to his father? Yes, he was. But this conversation is about the Bridgertons and how they operate in a way that clearly highlights that as far as they are concerned, what they want and need is what matters first and foremost. And Daphne set things up well in her season with that regard. Anthony, of course, follows through on that in his story as well, even back in season 1 with his relationship with Sienna, and this belief that he can have it all, the respectability of their society and the responsibility expected of him, whilst at the same time keeping Sienna on a leash, always coming back to her whenever he wanted, even after he had cast her aside and forced her to choose another patron, as that's the only way in which she could survive. We can see that in his relationship with Sienna, Anthony wanted her, but she wasn't respectable enough for his world, and so therefore there was a limit to what he could give her and ideally take from her. And yet every time she tried to walk away from him to something else, to someone else, he came right back around to screw things up for her yet again, to mess with her emotions so that she can take his messy ass back. And he keeps this spirit going in season 2 with how he wants the season's diamond, that is Edwina, and yet keeps high fucking Edwina's sister. Like, yes, we know the reason why he wants Edwina is because he knows inherently that he can never fall in love with her, and so she's the safe choice. Unlike her sister Kate, who is the live wire that has his emotions all over the place and is clearly more than capable of getting his emotions all tangled up with hers. We can say that the way in which Anthony keeps stringing both sisters on is inherently selfish, and we would be right. We can also say that Anthony making the active choice to push for Edwina when he knows very well that he will always be incapable of having any sort of feelings for her whilst being well aware that he desires her sister very, very much is the height of selfishness. And yet Anthony Bridgerton does not care. Because what he wants is what he wants, and his heart knows what it wants. And so we get a season filled with all the yo-yoing of emotions, and Kate and Edwina almost having their sibling relationship ripped apart because of Anthony Bridgerton, the selfish twat. I love him though. Even Benedict has his selfish moments, although most of them are highlighted when we get to his book and are able to see his actions stripped bare for us to read within the pages. Now, I'm not going to go into details on them because I don't want to spoil what we could possibly get in season 4, but just note that Benedict Bridgerton, like his sibling, is pretty one-track minded with regards what he wants, and disregard for others who might not be in alignment with that or whose wishes might contradict with what he wants, and so therefore he doesn't mind railroading them into getting it. I'm not going to say anything beyond that point, as that would bring me into major spoilers territory, but there's a certain entitlement that Benedict's position within society is a member of the landed gentry, brother to a viscount, second son to a very old and established line, with all the power and wealth that comes with that. And so therefore it is extra easy for someone like Benedict to thoughtlessly make certain demands that border into highly selfish territory. And then there's Colin, who I know some people might disagree with me on this point, and honestly, I would like to know if you agree with me or don't agree with me on this. But Colin's insistence on going to Cressida himself, his refusal to hear out Pen when she tries to communicate that she does and can afford to pay off Cressida, the fact that he does not even allow her to bring that up, is selfish. Because to me at that point, his head was fully in the Penelope's husband and it's my responsibility to handle this mood, which in turn shuts her out from being part of a decision that is directly tied to her life's work and identity, and the backlash that she would suffer as a result of it. It reads as selfish to me. And yes, ultimately it is Penelope herself who comes around to resolving this issue, not Colin, because it's her troubles to solve. Benign misogyny to me is still inherently selfish, because with Colin, he gets to position himself as the savior, disregarding whether or not that is what Penelope needs, and if his attempts at being a savior would actually save the day. It doesn't. Matter of fact, it makes things so much worse. And hell, even the admittance that part of what made him so angry about Pen's reveal as Lady Whistledown is the fact that she's so much more accomplished than he is a response that centers himself in that situation, which is selfish and something that Eloise does a lot as well within the story. Which is a great place for me to bring the video back to who it is about at its core, Eloise Bridgerton. Like I have pointed out so far, selfishness is something that her siblings also have in spades, and we've seen that in their story. We'll get to see the way in which Francesca is selfish in her story, because trust me, she is very selfish. But like I stated at the start of the video, a lot of our personality traits are ones that we do pick up within the interpersonal relationships we have with our families. And doing my rewatch of Bridgerton has led me to extend Eloise a bit more grace in her interactions that we've gotten in the show than the one I've extended to her before, prior to that. Yes, Eloise Bridgerton is someone who is caught in her own world. Our interactions with Penelope in season 1 show that she's hyper-focused on the things that she's interested in and often doesn't even pay attention to what is happening around her, especially with regards Pen, which is why Penelope at some point snaps at her when the undue stress of Marina trying to pass on her baby as Colin's gets to her. But at the same time, when I look at the other Bridgertons and what they're up to in the seasons, Daphne, who assaults her husband in a rage at him not being straight with her, Anthony going on with Sienna and all that entails, and I think to myself, you know what? If this is the role model that she's working with, then I can see why she's turning out that way. Eloise's dalliance with the radicals is selfish in that, yes, she's focused on ideology that she wants to learn more of, and it stands the chance of putting her entire family in trouble if it goes a certain way. But season 2 is also the one that has Anthony deciding to court societal shunning for his entire family and humiliation when he pulls off a publicized courtship of one sister whilst breathing all over the other one. I think that a lot of the time when we are quick to castigate Eloise and her decisions and choices as being particularly selfish, we do so without really considering everything else that is going on. The Bridgerton family is one messy ass place, and every single one of them are often focused on what they want and what they desire and what they are chasing. And it's not an attempt at a justification for Eloise's actions, but more of a pointing out that if we're going to castigate her for being selfish, then that should apply to every one of her family, except maybe Gregory and Hyacinth because they are too young at this point. But yes, Violet totally falls within this as well, because I don't know what's more selfish than deciding to check out after your husband and your children's father dies, leaving your eldest to bear the brunt of raising his siblings, whilst your kids wonder if that is the day you'll finally show up to have a meal with them. Now, as I said earlier, our actions in season 3 definitely still highlight how selfish she is. Her lack of consideration for Cressida and what she's going through, her inability to sympathize with her friend, unaware of the burden that's been placed on her, and how the Cowpers are pushing Cressida into the pit. That was what led to her deciding to claim the Lady Whistledown identity publicly. Like, yes, Eloise should have paid more attention to Cressida. She should have had a thought for her friend instead of focusing only on herself and her anger that Pen and Colin are about to get married and what that says, and her mistaken belief that she was used by Pen to get to Colin in some weird-ass way. But now that I've come to the realization that the Bridgertons are all different flavors of selfish, it tracks that that's the way in which she acts. It tracks that she really doesn't really know how to be a friend, how to be selfless, how to put someone else's concerns and interests above her own. She hasn't been taught to do so. She doesn't have the example with which she can do that. Penelope, as the only friend she's had up until that point, is someone who hasn't put her foot down with Eloise and her selfish tendencies in the past. And then we add the fact that the Bridgertons are not only selfish but also several flavors of headstrong, then it makes for a combo that requires the level of Pen screaming at Eloise for her to finally get the message. When she does, though, you can see the moment when the words actually click for her, and that, for me, that scene of Pen shouting at Eloise to let her know that she has her own issues as well, was what planted the seed for me to realize, finally, that there is a very high possibility that before that conversation, before that happened, nobody else had had that type of talk with Eloise before. No one else had called her out so openly on her selfishness before, because in her family, that is the norm. And I don't know, but that makes me just a tad bit sad and a bit more understanding of the character of Eloise Bridgerton. But of course, that is just me. I would, as always, love to hear your thoughts. Do you agree or disagree with what I've had to say in this video? Please let me know in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. If you cannot, however, do consider checking out my other channels. And if you like what you see or hear, maybe hit subscribe. One of them is a gaming channel and the other is an ASMR channel. I have all of them linked in the description box if you're so interested. But either way, I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.